Picture this. It is 9 o'clock in the morning on March 24th, 2026. The sun is barely up over Miami Gardens, Florida, and inside the conference room at Hard Rock Stadium, a group of WTA executives are sitting around a table with the kind of faces you only make when something has gone terribly, catastrophically wrong. These are not people who panic easily. These are seasoned sports business professionals who have managed multi-million-dollar tournaments for years. But on this particular Tuesday morning, every single one of them is staring at a spreadsheet that is about to blow up the entire tennis world. The 2026 Miami Open was supposed to be a triumph, a landmark moment, the most profitable tournament in the event's history. Ticket sales had surged 48% in the weeks leading up to the first serve, a number so extraordinary that even the most optimistic financial projections had to be revised upward. Merchandise bearing the name and image of one particular player had accounted for 57% of all sales, more than every other athlete on the women's tour combined. Broadcast ratings across the Philippines and throughout the global Filipino diaspora had shattered every record ever set for a WTA event. The buzz was real. The energy was electric. The money everyone assumed was going to pour in. And then the numbers landed on that conference room table, and everything changed. The tournament had projected $47.2 million in total revenue. The actual figure that came back was $42.5 million. That is a shortfall of $4.7 million, and in the world of professional sports, a $4.7 million miss does not get quietly swept under the carpet. Sponsors were already on the phone demanding answers. Broadcast partners were threatening to renegotiate their contracts. Insurance claims were being filed. And the WTA, an organization that prides itself on empowering female athletes, decided in that room on that Tuesday morning that they needed someone to blame. They looked at their spreadsheets, they looked at their projections, and they landed on the name of a 20-year-old girl from the Philippines who had done nothing but show up and play the best tennis of her young life. That name was Alexandra Eala, and what happened next sent shockwaves through the entire sport. Let us back up, because to understand just how outrageous this situation really is, you need to understand what Alex Eala had actually done for this tournament. Before the first ball was even struck, Eala had single-handedly transformed the Miami Open into a global event. Filipino fans had traveled from thousands of miles away, crossing oceans and continents, spending money on flights, hotels, food, and merchandise, all for the chance to watch their 20-year-old hero compete on one of the biggest stages in women's tennis. The ticket demand was so intense in the weeks before the tournament that the WTA's own online ticketing system had reportedly crashed under the weight of Filipino fans trying to secure seats. Sessions featuring Eala were selling out faster than any other matches on the draw. Courtside sponsors were paying premium rates specifically because they wanted their logos visible during her matches. Broadcast networks had committed to primetime slots based on projections that assumed she would be on court deep into the second week. Alex Eala did not just participate in the 2026 Miami Open. She was the Miami Open. She was the reason the tournament had generated those eye-popping pre-tournament numbers in the first place. And now, with the final accounting on the table, the WTA was about to make one of the most tone-deaf decisions in the organization's history. Within hours of that emergency meeting, an internal memo marked confidential began circulating among WTA executive leadership. By the time the afternoon was over, it had leaked. And when the tennis world read what was inside, the reaction was nothing short of volcanic. The memo laid out the organization's assessment of why the tournament had missed its financial projections, and the language was cold, clinical, and absolutely stunning in its audacity. The over-reliance on a single player's marketability created an unsustainable revenue model, the document read. When that player failed to advance past the fourth round, the tournament's financial structure collapsed. But the most damaging passage was still to come. While Alexandra Eala's popularity is undeniable, her inability to convert that popularity into consistent deep tournament runs represents a systemic risk to WTA events that rely on her drawing power. Going forward, tournament marketing strategies must account for the volatility of a player who has yet to prove she can sustain the level required to meet financial projections. Read that again. Slowly. The WTA, the organization founded on the principle of championing female athletes, had just described a 20-year-old player as a systemic risk. They had taken a young woman who had brought more new fans to their sport than almost anyone in recent memory, who had sold out sessions, crashed ticket systems, moved merchandise at historic rates, and driven broadcast interest to record levels. And they had called her a liability. Not a star. Not a phenomenon. A risk. And here is what makes it even more infuriating. The memo conveniently forgot to mention a few critical facts. Facts that paint an entirely different picture of why the Miami Open's numbers came up short. Let us talk about the rain. Because if the WTA was serious about understanding why their financial projections missed, the weather would have been the first thing on that memo and the last. The 2026 Miami Open was absolutely battered by storms during its opening week. On March 15th, the tournament suffered a complete washout. Every qualifying match, every practice session, every scheduled event that day was canceled. Players arrived at the facility, warmed up, and went home without hitting a single competitive ball. 3 days later, on March 18th, the situation deteriorated further. A full tournament shutdown was declared, and 37 scheduled matches across both the ADP and WTA draws were wiped from the schedule. Players including Venus Williams, Matteo Berrettini, Stefanos Tsitsipas, and Grigor Dimitrov were left sitting in locker rooms and waiting areas for hours before the call was finally made to cancel the entire day. The financial impact of those weather cancellations alone was estimated at over $2 million. Lost concession sales. Lost merchandise revenue at the venue. Ticket refund obligations. Logistical costs that multiplied with every hour of delay. The tournament's insurance policies covered some of it, but not nearly all of it. And yet, in a memo that was supposedly designed to understand why the Miami Open had missed its financial targets, the weather barely warranted a mention. The rain that canceled 37 matches and wiped out millions of dollars in revenue was apparently less important than the fact that Alex Eala lost in the fourth round. And then there was the sponsorship math, which was perhaps the most embarrassing part of the entire situation for the WTA's own leadership. Several of the major sponsors who are now demanding answers had negotiated key player performance insurance policies based on Eala's pre-tournament ranking of number 29. Those deals had been signed weeks or even months before the first serve. But by the time the tournament actually began, Eala's live ranking had dropped to number 51 as her semifinal points from Miami 2025 expired off her record. The policies had been written on projections that were already outdated before a single match had been played. That is not a player problem. That is an organizational failure of basic financial planning. Broadcast partners had a similar story. Networks had paid premium rates for exclusive rights to Eala's matches, but those rates were based on the assumption that she would reach at least the quarterfinals. When she exited in the fourth round, broadcasters faced a 23% shortfall in expected viewership hours. They demanded compensation. They got it, and the tournament absorbed the cost. But again, whose fault is that? The networks negotiated their deals based on a best-case scenario that any serious sports finance professional should have known was never guaranteed. You do not write a broadcast rights agreement premised on a developing 20-year-old reaching the quarterfinals of every tournament she enters and then act shocked when the math does not work out. As one sports economist put it bluntly in the days after the memo leaked, you do not build a $47 million revenue model on the back of one player. That is not a tennis problem. That is not Alex Eala's problem. That is basic business, and the WTA failed it. When the memo hit social media and the broader tennis community got its first look at how the WTA was framing this situation, the response was immediate, fierce, and deeply personal for millions of people around the world. Filipino fans, many of whom had spent their savings to travel to Miami, who had woken up at impossible hours to watch matches on streams, who had filled those courts and created an atmosphere unlike anything the tournament had seen in years, were absolutely furious. The messages flooded every platform. They built their entire marketing campaign around her and then blamed her when it did not work out. That is not leadership. That is cowardice. Another fan wrote, Eala sold out stadiums. She crashed ticket systems. She outsold every other player in the field combined. And the WTA's response is to blame her for not winning enough. That is unbelievable. A third, perhaps capturing the sentiment most powerfully of all, pointed out the obvious. The WTA made $42.5 million. $42.5 million. At what point in the history of professional sports has $42.5 million been considered a disaster? The backlash was not limited to fans. Players began speaking out, first carefully and anonymously, then with increasing directness, as it became clear that the tennis world was not going to let this story die quietly. Jessica Pegula, who had faced Eala in the 2025 Miami semifinals and experienced the Eala effect firsthand, weighed in with characteristic thoughtfulness. She said she did not think it was fair to put that on Alex, that Eala is a great player who draws incredible crowds and handled herself with class throughout the entire week. The business side of things, Pegula noted, should not be any player's responsibility. Coco Gauff, Eala's friend and occasional doubles partner, was considerably more direct. Alex is 20 years old, Gauff said. She is out there competing with everything she has. If the tournament built its entire financial model around her, and it did not work out the way they hoped, that is not her problem. That is their problem. They need to own it. And then came the voice that perhaps carried more weight than any other in women's tennis. Billie Jean King, the founder of the WTA itself, the woman who built the entire organization from the ground up and dedicated her life to creating a platform where female athletes could be celebrated rather than diminished, issued a statement that was short, precise, and devastating in its clarity. She said she created the WTA to give female athletes a platform to shine, not to make them scapegoats for organizational failures. She reminded the tennis world that Alex Eala is the future of the sport, and that the appropriate response to her presence is celebration, not blame. The backlash grew so intense, so quickly, and from so many directions simultaneously that the WTA was forced to issue a public follow-up statement attempting to walk back some of the memo's most damaging language. The organization said it remained fully committed to supporting Alexandra Eala and all its athletes. It described the internal memo as part of a broader financial review, not intended to place blame on any individual player. It expressed regret for any misunderstanding. But in the court of public opinion, that statement landed with all the grace of a double fault on match point. The tennis world had seen the memo. They had read the words. They knew what it said and what it meant. And a carefully worded PR response could not unring that bell. While all of this was exploding across social media and tennis circles around the world, the subject of the entire controversy was at home in the Philippines, away from the cameras, away from the noise, preparing for what comes next. Her management team issued a brief, dignified statement saying that Alex was focused on recovery and preparation for the upcoming clay season and had no comment on matters outside her control. But those close to the player acknowledged that she was hurt. Not because she believed the blame was fair or warranted. She knew it was not. She knew exactly what she had done in Miami and what she had contributed to that tournament. What hurt was something deeper, something more personal. She had given everything to that week. She had walked onto the court in front of thousands of her own fans, carrying the weight of a nation's hopes and the pressure of a marketing campaign that had been built entirely around her name and her face. She had fought through a 3-hour, 20-minute marathon against Laura Siegemund, absorbing rain delays and tactical gamesmanship that would have broken players twice her age. She had battled through a tight second set against Magda Linette, showing the composure and resolve of a seasoned professional. She had stepped onto center court against Karolina Muchova, the 13th seed and reigning Qatar Open champion, and pushed through to the final point before her run came to an end. She left Miami with 120 ranking points, $15,720 in prize money, and a projected ranking of number 45. Not a triumphant deep run, no. but the performance of a player who is learning, growing, and competing at the highest level in the sport. A player who had done nothing wrong except lose to a very good opponent in the fourth round of a very big tournament, as most players do in most tournaments, because that is how tennis works. And the WTA's response to all of that was a confidential memo calling her a systemic risk. Let us also not forget what the numbers actually showed about Eala's impact on this tournament, because the narrative of failure that the WTA was trying to construct completely ignores the extraordinary commercial reality of what she had built. Before the first ball was struck, her presence alone had driven a 48% surge in ticket sales. Her merchandise had outpaced every other player in the field by a factor that defied conventional sports marketing logic. She had brought Filipino fans from across the globe into Hard Rock Stadium, fans who were first-time WTA ticket buyers, fans who had never before had a reason to spend their money on women's professional tennis, and she had turned them into devoted followers of the sport. The long-term value of that conversion, of introducing an entirely new audience demographic to WTA tennis, is worth infinitely more than the $4.7 million shortfall that the organization was so furious about. The WTA built a stadium-sized marketing campaign around a single 20-year-old player. They sold tickets based on her name. They attracted sponsors based on her face. They negotiated broadcast deals based on her trajectory. And then, when the inherent uncertainty of sport intervened and she lost in the fourth round, they blamed her for the consequences of their own planning failures. They did not build contingencies. They did not diversify their risk. They did not plan for the entirely predictable outcome that a young, developing player might not go on a deep run in every tournament. That is not Eala's failure. That is an organizational failure at the most fundamental level of sports finance, and the people in that conference room on the morning of March 24th knew it. Now the clay season begins, and Eala, with the Miami noise behind her, turns her attention to the surface where she has done some of her most formidable work. The WTA 500 Upper Austria Ladies Linz Open on April 6th will be her first clay event of the season, a chance to find her footing before the bigger stages ahead. From Linz, she heads to Madrid for the first WTA 1000 clay event, then on to Rome, and finally to Roland Garros, the French Open, the place where clay court tennis reaches its absolute pinnacle. The clay is where Eala was shaped. It is the surface where she trained under the guidance of the Rafa Nadal Academy, where she developed the patience, the footwork, the tactical precision, and the relentless physicality that have become the foundations of her game. Clay rewards intelligence. It rewards movement. It rewards the kind of grinding mental toughness that Eala demonstrated in every single match she played in Miami, even in defeat. On clay, points last longer. Patterns emerge more slowly. Solutions have time to develop. And Eala, with her tennis mind and her academy-trained clay court instincts, may find that this surface gives her something the hard courts of Indian Wells and Miami could not, the space to be her best self from the very beginning of a match. There is also the matter of what some observers have begun calling the Czech curse. Eala's record against Czech players currently stands at 0 wins and 12 losses, with Karolina Muchova adding her name to that list in Miami. It is a pattern that tennis analysts have begun examining closely, and the clay season, with its different rhythms and demands, may offer Eala the chance to finally break it. The slower surface neutralizes some of the aggressive power that has given Czech players an edge on hard courts, and Eala's ability to construct long points and find angles could prove decisive in ways that have not yet materialized on faster surfaces. She has said herself, after her victory at the Lynette tournament, that being back in a fourth round makes her feel the same as she did the year before, but also different. The same hunger, the same drive, but more experience, more wisdom, more understanding of what it takes to go deeper in these massive draws against the best players in the world. That is not the language of someone who is wilting under pressure. That is the language of someone who is quietly, steadily, relentlessly getting better. The tennis world has a tendency to define young players by their losses almost as much as their wins. Every great player in history has a list of fourth-round exits, early upsets, and tournaments where the result did not reflect the quality of the performance or the magnitude of the potential. The difference between those who become legends and those who fade away is what they do with those moments, how they process them, how they use them as fuel rather than allowing them to become weights. Alex Eala has already shown, in her short career, that she belongs in the first category. She has shown composure under the kind of public pressure that would shake athletes twice her age. She has shown resilience in matches where the momentum swings against her. She has shown a competitive intelligence that suggests the fourth round is not a ceiling but a starting point. And through all of it, through the $4.7 million controversy and the leaked memo and the WTA's clumsy attempt to make her the face of their own financial mismanagement, she has remained exactly who she has always been. Focused, dignified, locked in on the only thing that actually matters in the end, the next match, the next point, the next chance to show the world what she is made of. The WTA may have written her name in a memo about financial risk. The fans wrote her name on signs they carried across oceans. The players who have shared courts with her speak about her with admiration and respect. Billie Jean King, who has seen generations of champions come and go, named her the future of the sport. History will decide who is right. But based on everything that has happened in Miami in 2026, based on the standing ovations and the crushed ticket systems and the merchandise lines that stretched around the building, history already seems to be making its choice.